Buonasera.
Good evening and welcome to this meeting that has to do with the central topic of this meeting, which has been the object of many different conferences. I thank you all for being here. All our guests, Annamaria Furlan, General Secretary of the Italian Confederation of Workers' Trade Unions. Domenico Arcuri, Administrator of Invitalia, CEO of Invitalia. Stefano Barrese, Head of the Territorial Bank Division of Intesa Sanpaolo. And Vincenzo Boccia, President of Confindustria. This meeting has as a starting point a profound conviction. The conviction that work is an essential part of a person's dignity. We live in a world which is under great transformations, and we know that this has to do with employment. This is linked to employment. There are many different interpretations regarding employment with new digital technologies. There are some people who say that it helps, or others say that it hinders employment. Everybody agrees that there is a time for study and a time for work. But there is a continuous mixture of study and work. So trade unions need to find new ways of facing this new circumstance, because the workplace will begin to change. There will be more mobility. A world that is under transformation. Not only a crisis, but also a transformation. So we're not interested in income in and of itself, but we are interested in the possibility that a person may express themselves, that work be something for the person, and to work together, because the relational aspect of work is important for a person. We must look at businesses, their innovation, their capacity for innovation, for forming new places, new jobs, their disposition towards investment, regarding families and their way of educating their families, in favor of an education so that young people can reclaim their responsibilities. An attention towards the individual especially. We have talked about the sustaining of the educational system, supporting the educational system in this meeting. And in this particular conference, we will talk about 4 different topics: businesses, trade unions, private investments, and public investments. 4 very important elements in a world under transformation. So I straight away will give the floor to Annamaria Furlan, because traditionally the trade unions are an institution that talks about, that has as its center the dignity of man at the center of work. So we are very curious to listen to her.
First of all, thank you very much for the invitation and for the opportunity you give CISL, the Italian Confederation of Workers' Trade Unions, to meet so many young people, which happens almost every year in occasion of the meeting. At the end of June, we concluded a very long process inside CISL. It involved a lot of the staff, of the employees in every place, every working place. And we decided to call our Congress, the Congress for the person and for the world and for the work. I believe that we shouldn't only talk about work and jobs, but as well as in all of the Western world, we should rediscover the link between person and work. Person and work were born together, and they develop together. A person's work determines the formation and growth of a person, and it is only the way a person can express their necessities and start relationships. The person starts thinking about common good, democracy, participation, and this is only thanks to their work, the work they do. I believe that this aspect has gone through some very rough times, especially during the economic crisis in the Western world, which was very worrying in Italy, especially a crisis that has struck even other countries. In many other areas of the world, we're not talking about an economic crisis, but wars and disasters, so different kinds of crises. Despite all of this, the person, the dignity of the person must be put at the center. The most effective and safe way to assure a fruitful future is to do exactly this. In this way, our citizens will have a better life. We can do a lot to achieve this goal. Just like many other issues, important issues about a person's life, the job we do has an international importance. It is linked to international politics and international issues. And this is why it is important today to talk about job, work, and about its meaning in our community, in our society, in our democracy. And the way we talk about it must take into account the international context and the international dimension of a person's job. At least over the last 30 years, we have very often talked about job and Europe and about the creation of what we believe is a fundamental element of the future for workers and citizens of the world. I'm talking about the creation of the United States of Europe. Nowadays, the international dimension of job, international relationships linked with a person's job, the international logics, all of this, in order to be successful, need the creation of the United States of Europe, which I believe will be necessary not only for the issue of a worker's right, but also for the issue of peace. This is a topic, very important topic for international relationships. Europe must build peace and preserve peace, but at the same time, you see that nationalistic movements are spreading and development, and in this Europe, we're no longer able to face issues such as the right to citizenship. Talking about the United States of Europe means talking about very important issues linked to a job of a person and to its quality. I'm talking about the right to have a job, I'm talking about the welfare system, I'm talking about Europe's all different dimensions. And I'm also talking about a European collaboration that has to be created in several fields. Institutions can do a lot, as well as trade unions can do a lot for our Europe. They can communicate with international processes concerning jobs. And in this communication, if we do not have an element in common, it means we will not be able to play an anti-dumping role in our Europe. Barriers do not only hinder participation processes in the country's political life, they also hinder the working dimension. This dimension is a very strong element to fight against bad competitiveness. And it can play a very important role even in the social dimension. So the work's social representation has, and every institution and entity representing workers has to carry out this work. Now, I know that several aspects have been already talked about during this meeting. The topic of innovation in Italy is usually talked about not in a reasonable way. But innovation is fundamental for a country that brings on international markets the quality of products. After many years later than other countries, now Italy is working on a new kind of industry, a new kind of production, which in Italy is called Enterprise 4.0. We should also think about the new kind of jobs linked to the creation of this industry. This means basing our work on quality and not on contractual dumping. We should face this issue by thinking how the transformation of jobs becomes an inclusive element in this industry. So it is very important to acquire new skills, new competencies, so that workers can be included in the labor market. Thus, innovation will not lead to unemployment, but it will become a new opportunity of growth for every employee and every worker. To do this, we must put at the center of the contractual dimension the skills of a worker, the skills that every worker has to have and that they learn. At the same time, we should start a true dialogue, a continuous collaboration between work and education, unlike what's happened in our country until now. Many European countries have managed to do this thanks to the collaboration between schools and working places. They have brought the unemployment among young people basically to zero. In Italy, we should follow their lead and do the same. The community, the state, has to do this. Institutions have to contribute, but also social parties can play their part. They can do their part even in the collaboration between schools and working places. Moreover, the dialogue between school, businesses, and territory should change, should be renewed. We need a new contractual method in order to reward a worker's knowledge and at the same time relaunch the topic of productivity. In my opinion, our country and our businesses need to go back to the importance of productivity. But we should also define what we mean by productivity. We should always keep in mind that this is a very important aspect for our country and for the overall labor market. For example, our country has a very old railway system, and it doesn't make a good impression for this. If every decision is questioned and is questioned because of the presence of mafia and so on, then the system will face continuous difficulties. So we have to intervene in these structures. At the same time, we should face the issue of lawfulness. At the same time, present ourselves to the whole of Europe with different competencies and skills than the ones we have now. At the same time, work unites generations. I'll try to be as synthetical as possible, but I would like to underline that a very important aspect. For many years, our country has preserved a very strong social pact. But many times, instead, people try to put one generation against the other, despite the existence of this pact. We have a very important agreement with the government on providence. We have already carried out one part of this agreement, and now we're carrying out the second part, which is about young people and about how workers can carry out their job and for a long time. We're not questioning life expectancy, of course, but we would like to emphasize the fact that not all workers are alike, as well as not all people are alike. Now, for young people, this aspect is very important. For the current situation, young people in the future will be poor pensioners. And this is usually used to discourage young people. There's always someone trying to start a fight between generations, only because it attracts an audience. But this is not the reality of our country. This is not the truth. Our country went through strikingly hard times, and nonetheless, we faced them thanks to a very important factor, the Italian family. The issue of solidarity among families is important. We need to spread these kinds of messages. We should change the message that we spread without trying to put generations one against the other continuously. By fighting unemployment of young people, we will give hope to our country. Our country needs answers. By doing this, we will also create a more deep collaboration between schools, working places, and other very important aspect. Thus, moreover, creating real policies that support families is as important. Through investment and infrastructures, we can build a country that is becoming more and more competitive thanks to the quality of its products. We need to have priorities, to choose our priorities. And if we choose the person as a priority, then our country will have more authority, will play a bigger role in the European dream. Thus, we will give back hope to our citizens, even to those we still do not see as Italian citizens, even though they were born here. We will build a better future for our young people and a better future for the dignity of those people that are a bit older and that live and work in our country. Thank you.
Grazie.
Thank you, Annamaria Furlan. She spoke about how things work on a national level. Italy, it is an important case study for Italy, as the CISL is the Italian Confederation of Workers' Trade Union. Can be a model for the birth of other confederations in Europe. Can you help us understand more about the relationship between businesses and a possible increase in employment? I will answer the question at the end of my intervention. I will begin with a sentence that I wrote down after receiving your invitation. The most evident flaws of an economic system is the impossibility to have a full employment for its citizens. This is in a book written by Keynes in 1936. We are called to dialogue with this sentence, and it can cause many debates today. This is quite an original debate. There are two sides. One says that the crisis is behind us, and there's another side that says that the crisis is still in front of us, that we still need to face it. The question to this debate, I think, should be based on economic indications, and which tell us that we are still far away from recovering the situation that we had before the beginning of the economic crisis and the beginning of this century. But I resolved my reflection on all this using a phrase by Federico Caffè. I offer a partial reflection on the crisis and what's going on at the moment. In these 17 years since 2000, we haven't grown enough to create significant employment. So if we thought that Caffè was right, we would have to say that the last 17 years have not been important and significant at all for our economic history. What we need to do is, in order to grow more and more and create rates that are acceptable, employment rates that are acceptable, we must eliminate one of the characteristics that is unfortunately part of our economic system. We are a country without memory. We forget what has happened yesterday, and we propose for the future new approaches and new perspectives that forget one of the most fundamental variables which distinguishes the man's nature, which is man's memory, his capacity to remember. Since the beginning of this century, many things have happened, and I would simplify them in this way. We have contributed to creating an unequal world. A world that went from the alpha of money to the omega of misery. Our social services have not managed in this this part of the century to correct this kind of inequality. I won't talk about why, but I'm sure this is all clear to all of you. One reason: the crisis in which we find ourselves is a result of the crossover of two variables, which are marketing, which creates the need for false needs, which creates the existence of false needs, and finance, which has created a huge mountain of debts, which often went to satisfy false needs. This created an unequal world, which, if we get to delve deeper into the reasons of this, we can go and understand the memory of what happened in history, and perhaps think of new solutions for employment. I think that this effort should develop itself along 5 lines. There must be an attention on 4 variables. We must begin to look after plural models and leave behind singular models. Often we have talked about individuals. Very seldom have we spoken about communities. Community is a group of people more than 2, which has as its main responsibility the protection of plurality. It is not enough to protect individuals, but we need to create employment for a community. I agree, but at the same time, if we create startups in our country, this is not enough. We should start thinking in a pluralist way and stop thinking in a singularist way. The second point is that we should start talking about we should stop talking about our citizens as rich because they are poor. Italy, and this fact has been very often hidden in Italy. There are many people on the borderline of being poor, if not under the poverty line. And there are huge discrepancies in the statistics that we know, which explain what the income of our citizens is, and the full income of our country. Third point, in the relationship with the productive system, we have to stop projecting development projects, but we should start focusing on those who ask for growth. Italian businesses are demanding growth. They ask for support in their investments. This part of the world must respond and stop projecting, as it has done for many times, too many times. Fourth point, we should all make an effort to simplify and not complicate the relationship between citizens of power. One of the most important legacies that we have inherited is a stratification, and a terrible stratification, a labyrinthical stratification of public administration, which has no comparison in any place in the world, and does not help in the investment sphere, in the sphere of investments and private investments. We must work all. We must all make an effort to simplify the relationship between citizens and power. We should simplify administration and increase GDL. Fifth point, we should invest in the south, start from the south, and not only invest in the north. Italy is the only place, the only country that we know in which a third of the citizens produce a fourth of GDP. $20 million people that are not a Basque province, a region of Ireland, or Wales, which becomes one of the most important areas, attractive areas for investment in Great Britain. But we're talking about 20 million people, a third of our citizens, that produce a fourth of GDP. I have 4 proposals. The first that I mentioned, we must all make an effort to increase employment, a demand for growth. With a bit of presumption and with a little bit of pride, I say that Italy has earned €7 billion per business. I give you 2 statistics. The indications of approval of investments has arrived to 200%, 32%. This is very different to the situation. If you want to know more, you can have a look at what happened 10 years ago. The second one is a project of 90 days, which is much more, which is not less and not more than any other country. Dr. Furlan earlier on said we have to change infrastructure. I'll make an example. I'll give an example. I was born in the most southerly region of our continent. And when I was smaller, I won't say how old I am now, so I won't say how young that I was. I went for a train ride between Rome and Reggio Calabria. It was a 5-hour train ride, which was the same amount of journey between Rome and Milan. Now, to go from Rome to Milan, we need 2 hours. And from Reggio Calabria to Rome, still 5 hours. Third and second last proposal, we must try to stop defining ourselves as the beautiful country, because we were in the past the beautiful country. In the 70s, we were the country which attracted the most amount of tourists in Europe. There are at least 5 countries, according to statistics, that are countries that are more beautiful than ours. At the same time, Italy has the most amount of UNESCO protected sites. This kind of country that has the most amount of UNESCO sites cannot be the 6th in the classification of tourist attractiveness. Tourism and culture produce GDP. They produce new employment. They don't produce only. They don't only produce travel, employment and travel. My father, when he was young, he had to find some kind of a job. I had to search for a job, which is more complicated than finding it. My children won't search or find or have to find it, but they will have to invent it. They will have to make their own job. We don't understand this paradigm. If we continue to not understand this paradigm, we will continue to await for jobs to be given to us. And we don't invent jobs. I think that Professor Café will continue to be correct in his statement.
Thanks. Let's move on from public investments to private investments. Are banks ready to take a risk? This is an easy answer. The answer is yes. This is the bank's job. Of course, they have to take more risks and change the way they take risks as our world is changing. We talk a lot about innovation. Over the last few days, I've been thinking about innovation and about how much our world has changed over the last 8 years. The economic crisis in 2007-2008 has brought about a lot of difficulties, but also a technological development which has changed our world. Now, if we look more at Europe and outside our country, I noticed, and I would like to share with you, the fact that over the last 16 years, from the year 2000 to 2016, many businesses have development. Ten European businesses are the greatest in the world. Everything that is part. Usually in the past, there were not many European businesses that were this important on an international level. Their value was about 3 million euro. They hired about 2,000 people, and their benefits were 60 billion euro. Now, at the beginning of the century, these 10 businesses were the most important ones. Now only 2 of them have remained. And these are businesses, companies that are part of the information technology dimension. These kinds of industry earn twice as more as the others. They have doubled their turnover. And yet, their employment rate has gone down by 40%. Nowadays, the technological innovation doesn't take into account the person. What is central is income, richness. The 8 richest people of the world are part of the biggest companies in the world. And they are incredibly richer than any other person. There's Mr. Boccia sitting here with me, and this is an honor. Our country uses innovation in several industries, and it made it the driver of the company's growth, and yet today we're losing this aspect. Innovation shouldn't be seen as something we should simply support, but innovation should always keep in mind the importance of the person, putting people at the center of everything. We innovate so that people can use this innovation. The project innovation is only a tool. The final aim is always the person. This concept is always at the base of every enterprise, of every project. Projects of managers or entrepreneurs. I know a lot of brave entrepreneurs that have lost about 40 to 50% of their turnover. So they decided to lower their income, and over the next years their employment rate went up by 3 times. And they became successful. This is how every entrepreneur should act. Otherwise, our world will only be focused on 4 to 5 people that will have all the power in their hands. We will have an unregulated world. And we will lose the importance of the person. In this way, we will destroy employment everywhere. Now, what do we do as a bank? What can we bring to the table as a private investor? We can value positively. We can give importance to the commitment of every worker. As a bank, we have done several important investments, and I talked about this with Mr. Boccia before summer. One of the key elements we use to value businesses is innovation, but another one is also training. Innovation and training are intertwined. In this way, we can be successful. Last year, we invested 40 billion euros in enterprises. This year, over the last 6 months of this year, 25 billion euro. All of this shows that Italian entrepreneurship is alive. Of course, it's a difficult path, but we can do something. This is our responsibility as a bank, acting in the economic field. But we also have other kinds of responsibilities. Nowadays, a lot of things are done online. Just think of Facebook, Amazon. All of these payments are very often unregulated. As a bank, we are trying to combine the digital world with employment. Over the last years, we haven't created an online bank without people working, which looks like the easiest way and most cost-effective. We have decided to put technology at the service of people working inside the bank and at the service of people outside the bank, our clients. This has allowed us to keep our employment rate very high. It has become even higher over the last years, and it has also enabled us to react with success to the crisis. Unlike many other Italian banks, I believe this is a very important point of view on innovation and employment. I agree with the concept of the United States of Europe, but I believe that it would be enough if Europe was more attentive to certain topics and certain issues. Otherwise, we could not be able to guarantee a certain rate of employment. What we're trying to do is supporting employment, entrepreneurship, and at the same time keeping up with the Jones and keeping up our work as a bank. Thank you.
It is clear that the creation of new jobs has to do with businesses. And there have been many observations that have been made on the way in which businesses can create new jobs. You have always talked about productivity as a precondition, as well as innovation, in order to make Italian business competitive again. Thank you for your invitation. I would like to say that the fil rouge that has run through these interventions and of not only of this meeting but of all the meetings here in the meeting is the connection with a cultural identity. Work and project of life, and the necessity to give work value in a society in which everything seems simple, and we seem to have forgotten the points of criticism of our country, in which it seems that soon once they send our income home, everything will be okay. A society that is post-ideological society, and work is a central part of our society. And training should be internal and not external to businesses. And training at once seemed like a negative point. This helps us to focus on the connection between family, business, investment, and future. Italian businesses must make a huge transformation, which is a cultural transformation. I see this from a point of view of banking. From the 80s, the 90s, and 2000s, we have made many leaps in family business. Today, we made progress in institutions, and we must represent the public opinion that business is community. In some moments, there is agreement on this point, and others there is not. At others there is not. Last year, we have talked about a selective policy, because a business must obviously choose where to put its resources. With a selective policy, it has been decided from the government, and this brought positive indices, greater GDP, greater exports. We haven't solved everything, but this has helped in the right. This has brought us in the right direction. But behind the idea of economic policy, and this could be important for transformation, there's an idea of society which is open and desires to be coherent and exemplary. A society for industry, and that help the connection between family, work, and business. If we look at Macron's program, apart from the question of resources, he has a legislation program. We must also distinguish this from the Italian situation. Many times there is a confusion between legislative politics and budget politics. Macron has 30 policies that have to do with business, economic policies that 30 billion euro go to economic policy. England is asking itself how to deal with north of England. President Trump speaks of the industrial question as well. We are the second most industrial country in the world. So maybe the industrial question, from an etymological point of view, must not be a question of industrial countries, but maybe we should point towards competition in industry. And this is the challenge of our country. And at this point, we go back to the primacy of politics. I remember a phrase of Joaquin Farrovals. I asked at a round table, Papa Wojtyla, what he remembered from his life as most important. The ability to discern what was important and the most urgent questions from the most important questions. And another sentence by Jean Monnet, which says, my objectives are, if politics is distracted, the intermediary bodies must, the intermediaries must look after the political situation. Intermediary bodies must take decisions. We can continue to continue on that line of selective economics, to have the opposite method which arrived in Italy from Europe. We can ask ourselves, what kind of effects do we want to have on the current economy, and what instruments, what resources do we need? We should start from the effects and then go to the resources, and not vice versa. So if we individuate, if we understand we must increase tourism in Italy. It is clear that growth is a precondition to fight inequality and should not be the objective. We must avoid that innovation. We must avoid a situation in which innovation become more important than the growth itself, in other words, the person. We can do this as Europeans and as Italians. This must be done using the correct method with co-responsibility in a society that very often is in conflict. A society which builds new salaries and fiscal policy can help to make good decisions we have to understand where we have to put our resources and not use them in an exclusive way. We must build we must give value to work, but we must also include young people and define a project of life. Because if I know that tomorrow I will be in a permanent job, we must still remember to make businesses as competitive as they should be and use digital technologies to increase employment. And we must help people to understand that there is no dichotomy between family and business. This is an essential element, because if Macron, who comes from an industrial country but not of Italy's level, and says that the future of France passes through manufacturing and industry, this makes it a priority in the French economic policy. So we have incredible potential, because an Italian business compared to a German business, we pay double, triple the taxes, but we are still stronger. This tells us that as a country we have a lot of points of criticism, but if we worked on a middle-term project to work on these deficits, we could become the most industrial country in the world. With these deficits, with these points of criticism, I would challenge any country. We have the awareness that we cannot do much on our own. We must be co-protagonists and ask ourselves how our country will be in the future and how to build it. And we must reason in pluralist terms, in a collective way. An awareness of a collectivity. In a Europe which has educated us towards tolerance, in a Europe in which growth has become an important element, and we must try to build a better society for our children. We must defend their freedom. This is a challenge, a European challenge, which is not amongst European countries, but between Europe and the other continents. We must have a sort of an opposite, an inverted competition. We must talk about competition and not harmony between economic policies. Italy can play a big part in this. Italy is a great country. It's an industrial company. After Brexit, as well as the French and the Germans, we can play a part in politics as co-protagonists. It is clear that when we talk about that we talk about youth employment, we must talk about the question of equality between generations, and not conflict, but equality between generations. Together, we can work towards a solution that may change our country. This is what the founders of Europe have taught us. George Bernard Shaw said, "There are people who see things and they ask themselves why. There are people who dream about things and they say, why not?" I wish for myself that I meet in my life that of the second type, where people who dream and ask themselves, why not? Thank you.
Time flies, so there won't be a second round of questions. But I believe very important elements have been touched on. We started and concluded with Europe, with the subject of a shared competitiveness. We touched on the necessity of a generational pact, of supporting family, of avoiding conflicts. We have touched on an inclusive development, paying attention to territories, certain territories, and the weakest links of the population. We have talked about the importance of education with regard to everything that's been done until now. We've touched on profit, not as the aim, but as a tool. We've touched on innovation that should put the person at the center of everything, which is not something banal. We have talked about a collective leadership, according to which everyone should account for their responsibilities. Now I would like to express my own opinion. Coming here, we saw children in the pools. I think that if we work carefully with the commitment on these topics, we will guarantee them a better future. We should also guarantee a better future for their fathers, their parents, and their grandfathers, because only in this way we can be sure that children will have a brighter future. I hope that our politicians will carry out this work together with us. I thank our guests and I wish you a pleasant evening. Thank you.